Hello and welcome to a special non-numbered episode of We'll Review It Ourselves, the podcast where we generally review the movies on our shelves, but every now and again we take a moment out to review stuff we have on our shelves. And in this particular episode, since one of our favorite listeners who has provided us with the most feedback and some interesting feedback, you may know him as listener Jeff. He is award-winning author Jeff Edwards, whose most recent book is Steel Wind. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all of Jeff's books, and we're going to talk about what's on Jeff's shelf, because that's what this podcast is all about. Probably more about the movies and stuff. So, Jeff, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. First, let me say I'm delighted to be on the podcast. I'm a huge fan. If you haven't figured that out by my comments and ratings by now, I will eventually give myself away, because I am a huge fan of the podcast. I really enjoy it. I kind of dance around the office as soon as I realize a new episode has dropped, so everybody knows how happy I am when that happens.
Thank you for that.
No worries. Having listened to quite a few podcasts, there's a lot of stuff out there that I don't enjoy nearly as much. I'm very choosy about the podcasts I listen to. And there's only 3 that I'm listening to right now on a regular basis. And you guys are at the top of the list. So about myself, let's see. Grew up in South Georgia, retired Navy chief. Like you, used to chase submarines for a living, which is a strange thing to do for a living. Somehow or other, in the middle of all that, I ended up writing some novels. So, I don't know, nerd, science fiction fan, naval warfare specialist, jack of all trades, and all around kind of strange person. I think that sums it up nicely.
That last bit is actually my favorite part, so just letting you know.
Someone I knew, actually someone I served with a long time ago, he said when you're normal, all you get is rational thought, and that's a one-trick pony. When you're a little bit weird, the universe is your oyster. So
I see no problems with that statement. I would rather know interesting people, and we'll just leave it at that. I like interesting people, and you are one of the most interesting people I know, because you've written, the 7 books, and you're also the only person I know whose name will auto finish when I do a search on Amazon. Interesting point of note.
I guess that is a neat little thing to know that at least the Amazon bots recognize me pretty well.
And if the bots know you, then, you're internet famous, and that's actually, worth something nowadays, right?
I think the term in my case is fame-ish, a little bit, but...
So your most recent book is called Steel Wind, which, for our listeners, I read as an advanced reader when the working title was Steel Wind Rising. And one of the questions that I did want to ask before we get to talking about the book is, when you title a book, do you workshop that out, or you come up with the title and then it's changed by someone, or someone suggests it? How does that work for you?
I don't think you could say that I have a reliable process. It's gone all kinds of different ways. The book you probably know as Dome City Blues originally started out as Smoke and Mirror Shades.
I remember.
And yeah, you probably do. And my first literary agent, Don Gerard, the late Don Gerard, sweetheart of a man, he said, I love the book, but the title doesn't work for me. And I said, what do you suggest? And we workshopped for a while, and what we ended up coming up with was Dome City Blues, and that was the beginning of the City Blues series. Dome City Blues, Angel City Blues, and the new one, Night City Blues, is in progress. So, but it's a little bit different every time. Sometimes it's a suggestion by someone else. Sometimes it's something I come up with. The Seventh Angel was always going to be the Seventh Angel. Sword of Shiva was always going to be Sword of Shiva. Neither one of those titles changed anywhere along the way. But I think every other book title I've ever had has gone through at least one metamorphosis and through one change, for better or for worse. And it's a little different every time. So I guess you could say I don't have a process for that part. It just kind of happens.
That's quite interesting, because I know from what I've read online, there are some authors that will strictly workshop, some that will say, no, this is my title, and move from there. So I think it's actually seems like it's more fun to kind of not know, where you start with a title and then you sort of end up with like, oh, you know what, this actually works better.
Yeah. Well, that is absolutely what happens to me. Torpedo, or actually Sea of Shadows, started out as Emergency Tango, which became Torpedo, which became Sea of Shadows. So it goes through a process.
I actually have 2 copies of Torpedo. For our listeners, Jeff and I have known each other for some time, so the fact that I have it and it's named Torpedo is not outside the realm of possibility. And I had bought 2 copies, had one signed for me, and because it's going to be worth money one day, and had one signed for my mom, and I gave it to her for Christmas. And when my mother passed away, I sort of picked that up and took it back. This is actually a very short story about the journey that the book that was signed for my mother took. I had loaned it to a friend, as one does with books, but I told her that it was a signed copy and that I would like it back. And I think somewhere along the way, she sort of forgot that it was a signed copy and that I wanted it back, and just assumed that it was a loaner copy that she could just give to someone else and move on with that. So after a year or so, I kind of followed up. I was like, hey, did you ever finish reading that book? And she said, oh, yeah, I finished that a long time ago. It was really great. I enjoyed it. By the way, my friend enjoyed the recommendation for the book, but she couldn't find it because she didn't know what she'd done with it, and she didn't remember that I'd wanted it back. So after a month or so of searching through all of her books and bookshelves, she finally found it and returned it. So it is now back on my shelf. But your book has gone out and come back like a boomerang.
Well, can I throw in another weird story?
Certainly.
About the same book, interestingly enough. Right about the time the book came out, the Iraq War was going relatively hot and heavy. And, most of the major fighting was over, but we had a strong military presence there, and we were running convoys, and there was still a significant amount of combat going on at the time. And someone I knew over there asked me to send him a signed copy of the book, so I did. He loaned it to someone. He loaned it to an Army sergeant who rotated stateside and took the book with him. So my friend contacts me a couple of weeks later and says, hey, I'm really sorry. That book went away. Can you send me another one? And I said, absolutely. And I sat down to sign it again. And in the process of, first of all, and we'll probably talk about this in a minute, I feel like an utter idiot every time I sign an autograph, just so you know. I mean, at this stage of the game, I've signed countless thousands of them, and I feel like a complete fraud every time I do it. But people like signed books. So I go to sign the book, and I suddenly realized the wrong person was signing the book, that the real heroes were the guys that were out there in the field. So instead of signing the book, I pasted a little kind of note in the flyleaf area of the book that basically said, as far as I'm concerned, the people who should really be signing this book are the real heroes that are out there. Please read the book, sign it, pass it on to somebody else in uniform. And that became the beginning of something called Operation Autograph that actually went on for the better part of 2 years. And by the time we got done, we had people were sponsoring them, and there were 40 or 50 copies that were bouncing around all over Iraq and Afghanistan. And various people were signing them. And every once in a while, one would come back. I've still got one of them where the margins are full of signatures and little notes and things like that. And anytime somebody sent us one back, we'd send them a hat and a Torpedo T-shirt and a new copy of the book and keep the cycle going. But that actually went on for better part of a year and a half, 2 years. We called it Operation Autograph. And I didn't sign one of those books, so they were signed by thousands of service members.
That is awesome. And do you know where those books are now? I mean, you said you had one, maybe two?
They're out there in the ether, yeah.
But the rest of them are still out in circulation?
They might all be in dumpsters or have been recycled by now, for all I know. But there's at least one that still has signatures and notes all over. And the interesting thing is, most of the notes weren't to me. They were service members communicating with other service members in the field. Here's a shout out to my buddies at Forward Operating Base Anaconda. And it's like it became a message in a bottle. Soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen out there in the field were communicating with each other. And my book just happened to be the conduit. And that was kind of cool.
That is outstanding. I don't know of any other authors that have ever done anything like that. Was it just an idea that grew organically, or?
Well, it just started with the one book. And then that one bounced around 4 or 5 times. And then I got an email from somebody who said, hey, we can't find that book. Can you send us another one? So by the time we had 3 or 4 of them in the field, the San Diego media heard about it. And I ended up doing, I think it was KUSI and maybe, I don't know, Fox or something. Did a couple of interviews about it. And suddenly people were contacting, asking how they could sponsor the book. So there ended up being, 40 or 50 hardcovers bouncing around out there. It was never really anything planned. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing that the snowball kept rolling.
I think that's some of the best plans, though, that the best things that occur are spur of the moment. Like, I don't know, it just seemed like a good idea at the time, and it grew into something far beyond what I had originally envisioned.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is, I mean, with the exception of the Wrong Army, that's the closest I've ever had to anything going viral. But it didn't go viral on the internet; it went viral in the real world.
Which is actually better, I would posit.
I don't know. I'd be happy either way. I just think that's cool.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's the good kind of viral, not the
true.
not the you got ill. So this conversation started rabbit hole, as we like to call them on this podcast, because we started talking about Steel Wind Rising, and the way books get named, and that morphed into discussion about Torpedo. So let's bring it back to Steel Wind for a minute. Can you tell us a little bit about the plot of the book? I mean, I've read it. Just for our listeners.
Yeah. To put it in a nutshell, a routine Coast Guard inspection of a ship in the Puerto Rico area turns into a firefight. And as the U.S. investigates, we discover that North Korea has been smuggling nuclear missiles into Cuba, and it ends up becoming the second Cuban Missile Crisis. And the U.S. president does what John F. Kennedy did, which is order a naval quarantine around Cuba to stop anything else from getting in there, and tensions go up and what have you, only to and that's when we discover that North Korea has a secret weapon that basically starts cutting the blockade ships to ribbons. And it's basically about an unexpected quantum leap in technology from an unexpected quarter.
So it's interesting that North Korea is the antagonist. Was that based on the political situation at the time? Because the book came out in it was July, I think, was it?
Yeah, July.
And there was a whole lot of news going on about North Korea, and you had obviously already written the book. And how, I guess sort of off topic, but bringing it back, how long does it normally take you to write a book like Steel Wind?
I think the best answer I could give to that is about 18 months. The actual writing part goes faster than that, but when you count getting the idea, mapping it out, figuring out kind of what the story arc is, and figuring out what the major pieces are, the major plot elements, and then doing the research, and then writing it and rewriting it and what have you, I'd say start to finish, 18 months is a pretty good guess.
So in that 18 months leading up to July, there were missile tests going on in North Korea, nuclear tests going on. It all dovetails quite nicely into the book, and then the real world intruded and maybe changed the dynamic. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Well, a couple of things. The first thing is it was longer than 18 months for this book. And the reason is I finished the book, but because I still consult for the Department of Defense and still have a clearance, whenever I write about the military, specifically when I write about the Navy and anti-submarine warfare, I have to get permission to publish. So I submitted the book to the Pentagon Office of Pre-Publication Review, and the security reviews for my books typically take 6 weeks. This one took about not quite 11 months. So really, I was expecting the book to be in print a full year before it actually was. So you have to back the political situation up, not 18 months, but 28 months to get to when I started the book. And the interesting thing is, I wasn't really watching what was going on in the news. I mean, I was conscious of it at some level, but that wasn't how the book came about. The book came about because of 2 dinner conversations on 2 different evenings that I had with my wife. The first one, we were sitting there having dinner, and I was finishing up Angel City Blues at the time, so I was still kind of in science fiction detective mode. But she knew that I like to kind of alternate between science fiction and military thrillers, so I was going to be working on another military thriller. And she said something like, I don't think I've seen a really good military thriller about North Korea. She's like, Teeth of the Tiger, that was interesting and what have you, but I don't really think anybody is seriously, other than North Korea invading South Korea and the Second Korean War, I don't think I've seen anybody do anything new and interesting. So that was percolating in my head. And then maybe a week later, she looked at me across the table, and we weren't talking about writing that time, and she said, have you ever wondered if there could ever be a second Cuban Missile Crisis? It was like the light went on in my head and the heavens opened up and the angels sang, and those 2 ideas came together, and then suddenly I went, bam, there you go. Because North Korea...
Were there 7 angels?
Yeah, 7 angels. Oh, well, yeah, 7 of them, exactly. because North Korea's short and intermediate range nuclear missiles are mostly carbon copies of very successful Chinese and Russian designs. Their short and intermediate range missiles are spot on, very good. They're having a little trouble with their long range ICBMs. They'll get it figured out. Their learning curve is actually not much longer than ours was when we were figuring it out. But their short and intermediate range missiles are spot on. They're extremely capable. And some of those things will reach out 1,000 miles. If you've got a missile with 1,000-mile range sitting 90 miles off the coast of Florida, you can basically hit everything east of Pueblo, Colorado. I suddenly realized that was it. That was the secret to this book.
And I like the way you tied the two together, Cuba and North Korea. That was actually one of the questions that I wanted to ask, was what made you put those two things together? And I think you just explained it.
Yeah, it's like I say, it was happy accident and two conversations that just happened to come together. Well, one of the other things that I do when I write military thrillers is I like to ask myself the question, what scares the hell out of me? And then choose that as kind of one of the elements of, and that's a situation that could potentially be incredibly scary. So
I agree. And to go back to Torpedo, that is one of the things that I know you like to do, is take something and shift it just a little bit and go, what would happen if this?
Oh, yeah.
Not to spoil it for our readers, or for our listeners, rather, Torpedo, or Sea of Shadows, if you prefer. The actual title you'll find on Amazon is about 4 German diesel submarines that attack American ships. And it's kind of one of those things like, what do you do when everybody knows the playbook? It'd be like Alabama playing themselves in football and going, well, we know how to stop every single play you have, so you kind of have to think on the fly and be flexible.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of about what happens when an ally becomes an enemy, and when they know how you think and how you communicate and how you fight. And the thing is, it's basically socioeconomic circumstances that drive the North Korean, the still recycling to Steel Wind, that drive the German government to make some bad decisions that results in a conflict that nobody wants. But that's the big thing there, which is, and you hit the nail on the head, which is what happens when your ally is suddenly an enemy, and you have to fight somebody who knows how you fight.
Yeah, and then again, going back to Steel Wind, what do you do when your enemy makes a deal with the devil with another kind of enemy?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a really interesting read, and for our listeners, I highly encourage it. It's on Amazon, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And one of the other things I did want to mention, and we'll brush up on it again, I just want to ask the question, are you still doing the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society fund drive?
Yeah, I absolutely am. For actually the rest of this month and all of December 2018, for every copy of the book that sells, regardless of format, we're donating $2 to Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. And I know we're going to have an ebook promotion somewhere in the middle of this that where the price of the book's going to drop to 99 cents briefly, which means that I'm actually going to be losing money on some of these. We don't care. Navy Marine Corps Relief Society is a fantastic organization, a fantastic nonprofit. They've been rescuing sailors and Marines and their families in trouble since before the First World War, for more than 100 years. And they've done it without a dime of taxpayer money. And they rescued me and my family and I a very long time ago. And I wanted to do something for them. So, yeah, absolutely. Every copy of Steel Wind that is sold until basically January 1st of 2019, I'm donating $2 to Navy Marine Corps Relief Society.
That's outstanding. I applaud you for that. When I was in the Navy, I gave to Navy Marine Corps Relief every year that I had an opportunity, and more than just the minimum, because it's important that we help our shipmates out. I mean, that was my driving force. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and you were a senior chief, you were a senior chief. I was a chief. I mean, at least 4 or 5 times when I was the chief, I ended up sending my junior sailors in trouble to Navy Relief and say, look, these guys are going to help you with financial counseling. They're going to help you do this. They're going to help you do that. They provide, coming home from the hospital kits, with layettes and diapers.
Little tiny baby sailor hats.
Yeah, little baby sailor hats. And, but it's like, not only do they provide financial assistance, which they do, sometimes it's in the form of grants, sometimes it's in the form of loans. Not only do they do that, but they also try to teach sailors and Marines how not to get in the circumstance where you need that kind of help again. How to manage their money better, how to plan, how to budget, how to sock away a little bit extra for emergencies, and basically just help them, as the old saying goes, learn to fish. So you don't have to keep feeding them.
Yeah, just closing up that analogy. You teach a man to fish, he eats for life.
Yep. That's a friend of mine used to say, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, and he'll sit in a boat and drink beer.
Listeners, if you have the opportunity, again, we'll have the link in the show notes to go buy Steel Wind from Amazon and help out the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. So I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about some of your other works. You had mentioned that your other genre that you have dove in, that you jumped into. Yeah, you dived. Is science fiction, and you have the Angel City Blues, Dome City Blues, Angel City Blues, and then you said Night City Blues?
Night City Blues is on the way, yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that. David Stalin is one of my favorite characters of all time, for no particular reason whatsoever.
Well, you were the physical archetype for David Stalin in the painting that Crystal Larson did. An artist friend of mine offered to do a painting for the cover of the first book. And she's a fantastic artist. And we needed a David Stalin archetype. And I had this jacket that I used to call my Blade Runner jacket. And we went out somewhere where they were building a subdivision and dressed Brian up and gave him a gun and put him in the Blade Runner jacket and got some snapshots of him with a cigarette in his mouth. And sent him off to Crystal, and she did an amazing painting of David Stalin. So at some level, Brian Morgan is the David Stalin archetype.
And I had a lot of fun doing that. That's still a story that I tell. One of the things that Jeff is selling himself short on is he is kind of a Renaissance man. He not only writes, but he does digital graphics on the computer, and he went in and made me look much better than I actually do. The joke I've started using recently is I've got a face for podcasting, but he also made the gun look more impressive and made me look muscular. So it was a lot more Jeff working on a final product that he wanted to give to Crystal than it was just me looking all handsome and suave and debonair.
No, you were pretty handsome and suave.
But one of your other short stories actually is Postcards from the Moon. Can you tell us what was the creative drive behind that?
Yeah, I absolutely can. Brenda and I, my wife and I, went to, I guess it's Disney Hollywood Studios down in Orlando. And there's a place there called the 50s Sci-Fi Diner where you, I think that's the name, but essentially it's indoors. But when you walk into the dining area, it's like being outdoors. All the tables are in these fiberglass mock-ups of cars, and it's like being at a drive-in movie theater, and it's surrounded by wooden fences, and it looks like you're in a drive-in movie theater, and there's a great big drive-in movie screen, and they're showing 30-second clips from every cheesy black and white sci-fi movie you ever saw. Plan 9 from Outer Space and Radar Men from the Moon and Roman Robot Destroyer or whatever. It's pretty much, they're all up there. Food was pretty good. We enjoyed it, and I enjoyed all the clips and everything. We walked out of there into the sunlight, and that's one of those things like walking out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, where you've been in the dark and it looks like it's nighttime, and you walk out and it's noon, and you're completely shocked because your brain has accepted the illusion that it's nighttime. So we walked out into the sunlight, and I just said the words "Postcards from the Moon," and Brenda said, "What does that mean? Was that one of the posters in there?" And I said, "No, it's just a phrase that popped into my head." She said, "What does it mean?" I said, "I have no idea." And when we were riding on the bus, the shuttle bus back to our hotel, I got the idea for the story. And this was a case of, you talked about, where does the title come from? And this was a case where it was the title first and then the story. And between the bus ride back to the hotel and the flight back to San Diego, I wrote the entire story in longhand and then typed it up. And actually, even though it's a short story, it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done. It's probably the closest thing I've ever written to a Ray Bradbury story.
I equated it more to Robert Heinlein, some of his earlier works.
I would be absolutely flattered to think of it in those terms.
And I downloaded it as soon as it was available and read through it. And I mean, it's just an absolutely fantastic little short story about. Well, I'll let you tell it. I mean, yeah, whatever you want to give away without spoilers.
It's it's the term epistolary. It's a story where 90% of the story takes place in a letter. It's an old gentleman named Papa Hank communicating with his grandson Doug, whom he still calls Dougie. But Papa Hank has disappeared from the elder care facility where he lives. It's basically a nursing home, but they don't like to call it that. He's just vanished, and he's vanished under conditions that, well, it shouldn't have been possible for him to vanish. And his grandson, while everyone's searching and trying to figure out where this half-blind and arthritic and partially and mostly crippled old gentleman has tottered off to, his grandson gets a letter that, and when he reads the letter, he only has two choices. He either has to believe that his grandfather's gone completely off the rails and he's absolutely insane, or the nature of reality is not what we think it is. And it digs back into his childhood and what have you. But it's about hope, and it's about the future that we used to imagine that somehow somewhere along the way we stopped thinking of, and it's about the possibilities for exploring the universe around us. So it's my Ray Bradbury story.
Okay, and that's one of the things that I actually like about it is the reality is not what you think it is. And exploring the universe. I mean, not just it's postcards from the moon. So at some point the moon is involved, or it's just someone referring to it. Yeah, and postcards. There's a little bit of both. It's in the title.
In fact, there literally are postcards from the moon in the story. So,
but the exploring the nature of your own reality and realizing that, oh wait, that's not the way I thought it was. So. It's definitely, I can't recommend this short story highly enough to our listeners. And I don't want to pick a favorite of Jeff's books. I mean, that's, but this is my favorite short story. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
I wish more people knew about it, which again, hopefully, with the podcast and everything, but it's one of those things that I recommend to people because it's a quick read and it's very poignant and it has meaning, which to me, is what makes a short story worthwhile. So,
well, thank you. There's it's funny you talk about not many people knowing about it. I think it's a great story. I love it. I mean, I wrote it, and I try to only write things that I'm going to like. But one of the things I've discovered that's kind of interesting is that, and maybe this stops happening when the size of your audience reaches a certain size. I don't know. But the interesting thing is I have, in the months leading up to the release of a new military novel, I will receive hundreds of emails from people or pings online asking me when the new book is going to be ready. When's it going to be ready? When's it going to be ready? Can't wait. Same thing for the science fiction, for the David Stalin series and the City Blue series, to a lesser degree. That's a smaller audience, but they're no less appreciative of the work. If I write in either one of those veins, I know the book is going to fly off the shelves, at least for the first few months. It's going to I'm going to look at it and look at the sales figures and go, holy cow. I mean, this is amazing. That didn't happen with Postcards from the Moon. I didn't expect, because I don't write a lot of short fiction, I didn't expect it to have quite the same degree of popularity, but I also didn't expect it to kind of vanish without a trace, and it almost has. I think it's a damn good story. I think it's got a great cover. And if you're a fan of audiobooks, the gentleman who did the audiobook, it's about a half hour long. He just completely nailed it. He crushed it. It's a lot of fun. But it's one of those things where I always assumed that my popularity in the two genres that I write in would at least mean that I'd get a reasonably good audience for this. And they're like, nope, we like you for A, we like you for B. Stop trying to do C. We're not interested in that. Do A or do B, we're fine, but not so much with the C.
I wonder if the Stephen Kings of the world, the people who can sell, and please don't take offense to this. I mean, the people that, Oprah will stand up and go, oh, hey, this new book is out, or whatever, or like John Grisham that will have actual television advertisements so the book is coming out. I wonder how often they have a similar experience, or is it just a lot of people like, I don't know, it's so and so name, and I have to read it because it's got that name associated with it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I have the impression that John Grisham, when he got away from the legal thing entirely, I don't believe his book A Painted House had the same kind of success that his legal thrillers do. I think he got outside the genre and tried an experiment, and I think it was relatively well critically received, and I think it did okay, but it didn't explode. It didn't explode. I don't know. That's a good question. As far as I'm concerned, at this stage of the game, there are some writers I would read their laundry list. It's if they wrote a grocery list, I'd read it. J.K. Rowling is one of them. I had actually already read the first Cormoran Strike novel, The Cuckoo's Calling, which is written under a pseudonym, Robert Galbraith. I would have never known that was J.K. Rowling. I will say this: I was a little bit depressed when I found out it was J.K. Rowling, because I'm like, good God, she has to be better at me than this too. It's like she just nails the detective. It's like she just crushes it. And I'm like, this is like the freshest take on the detective genre that I have seen in forever. And I love it. And the books are just brilliant. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That's Joe Rowling? I thought it was this Robert Galbraith guy that nobody ever heard of. But, her stuff has taken off. That was a case of, I think at this stage of the game, it doesn't matter what she writes, people are going to buy it. But the good news is she makes it worthwhile. Even the standalone novel that she did after the Harry Potter series, before she did the first Cormoran Strike, The Casual Vacancy. That is, in many ways, a supremely depressing novel, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to read it again. But it was brilliantly written, and it needed to be written, and it's the kind of thing that everybody needs to read once. I'm not sure I could make myself read it twice. But it's like, it seems like every time she decides to do something, she just crushes it. She knocks it out of the ballpark. And I don't know, maybe that's not my thing, but I will say this. My goal is to continue writing books that entertain me. As long as I'm doing that, I'm a happy camper.
And that was actually going to be related to my next question, was how long are you going to continue to write? And when you write, are you writing for the audience, obviously, but you're writing for an audience that wants to read what you would want to read. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I always hope people will read something if I write it. I mean, obviously you don't want to invest 18 months of your life in something and nobody but you reads it. But I'm really writing for myself first and foremost. Every once in a while, it's been a while since I've done it, but every once in a while I'll teach a writing class. And one of the things that I always write on the board is, if you can make yourself blank, you can make your reader blank. If you can make yourself laugh, you can make your reader laugh. If you can make yourself cry, you can make your reader cry. If you can make yourself afraid, you can make your reader afraid. I think if you can't impact yourself with what you're writing, then you're never going to impact anybody else. So I'm always trying to crack myself up or scare myself. I'm always my first reader. So while I'm hoping people will read it and enjoy the things that I do, in the end, I'm writing the kind of books I want to read.
And I don't think I can add anything to that. That's actually, I think, what a lot of people want to write for. So this dovetails into sort of one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about is, quite a number of years ago, you had explained to me a concept called MICE. And I'm hard pressed to remember what MICE stands for. It's an acronym, and it's the four different aspects of writing.
I wish I could remember where I stole it from. I will tell you, I will say straight up, I have studied the art and the craft of writing for many, many, many years. I've read so many books on writing that I couldn't even tell you all the titles. And there are probably 80 books on plot, theme, what have you, on my shelf right now. But somewhere along the line, I came across some fiction writer who was writing about the elements of fiction, and he or she, and I honestly don't remember which, said that you could divide most stories into four major categories, and they were MICE: milieu, idea, character, event. A milieu story is almost like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is it's a journey through Middle-earth. If you take the major events that happen in that story and strip out all the journey and all the traveling through the Midgewater Marshes and just go to the key events that are in there, you would have ended up with a 70,000-word novel, as opposed to this massive behemoth, 1,000-page long book. But you wouldn't want to do that, because that story is about the journey. It isn't about Frodo destroying the ring at the cracks of doom. It's about the journey that Frodo and Sam and everyone else takes to make that possible. So that's a milieu story. Then there are idea stories. I think 2001 is an idea story. What would happen if almost any story that begins with the words "what would happen if" is probably an idea story. Character stories are entirely about the character. They're entirely about this person. Forrest Gump is a character story. I mean, it doesn't matter where you drop him. It's about Forrest and what happens to him and how he interacts with the world. And then there are event stories. Event stories are about this thing that happens. With Titanic, if the ship doesn't hit the iceberg, you don't have a story. It's a ship crosses the ocean. But that's MICE, milieu, idea, character, event. And very few stories are only one of those. Very few stories are only milieu stories or only character stories or only event stories. But most stories have a tendency to be primarily one of them. I would say I tend to write idea stories for the most part.
I was going to ask which part matters more to you from a reader, and you said you're writing for yourself as a reader yourself. So I guess idea would be the answer to that question. But do you try to make sure that you incorporate like an even-handed approach to once you get the idea and it becomes the idea story? Do you go, okay, now I really do need to have interesting characters, or the characters driven by the idea because they have to be the characters that are in the place?
That to me is kind of interesting because I can't write about a character until I know who they are. I like to say as kind of a writing exercise, if Bob walks into a room, what does he do? We don't know because we don't know who Bob is. It's like, we don't know if Bob is a 7 foot tall hulking giant, a biker, or if Bob is a weaselly little accountant. We don't know who Bob is. But if I tell you James Bond walks into a room, what's he do? He's going to drink a martini, shaken, not stirred. He's going to drop some kind of urbane and witty one-liner. He's going to whip a laser beam out of his watch, and he's probably going to get the girl. If Indiana Jones walks into the room, you know what Indiana Jones is going to do. When you talk about people, you talk about how they're going to react. You find yourself saying things like, oh my God, do not get her started on politics. Or whatever you do, don't bring up religion in front of Grandpa because he's going to get angry. As we get to know who people are, we start to make predictions about how they're going to act.
Yes, we do.
We've got a pretty good idea of which one of our relatives is going to try to be in the restroom when the check shows up for the family dinner, in a restaurant. Who's going to try to be somewhere else when the check shows up? We've got a pretty good idea who's going to try to pay the check every time. We've got a pretty good idea of who wants to do it mathematically. We learn who these people are. And as we learn who these people are, we start to make predictions. I can't write a story about people until they're that real to me. I can't write a story about somebody until I know how they voted in the last election and whether or not their sock drawer is organized and what scares them and things like that. So while I start out with these ideas, my stories are very strongly about the people. But for me, it starts with the idea. What would happen if this?
Okay. And that's actually one of the things, I think you touched on it earlier a little bit. And one of the praises, one of the elements of praise, one of the pieces of praise that you've received is your military thrillers especially tend to be about normal people, not James Bond or Indiana Jones. They're not superheroes in regular clothes. Or rather they are. They're not superheroes in superhero clothes. If I could make that distinction.
Yeah, I think you can. Well, and that comes back to how I got into doing this to begin with, which is I had just written Dome City Blues. I was very proud of it. My agent started shopping it around New York, and we eventually got into this kind of joint book movie deal that where the rights got tied up for a while. The movie didn't end up getting made, but we had a lot of fun playing with Hollywood in the interim, and eventually I got the rights back and published it. But as my agent, the same guy, Don Gerard, was shopping the book around New York, around the major publishing houses, 2 or 3 times somebody came back and they looked at my bio and they went, this guy's an anti-submarine warfare expert. Why isn't he writing military thrillers? And Don comes back to me and says, that's a good question. Why aren't you writing military thrillers? I've been to your place. I've seen your shelf. You got Tom Clancy. You've got Dale Brown. You've got Michael D. Mercurio. You've got Edward L. Beach. I know you love this stuff. Why aren't you writing it? And what I told him was that I didn't see what I could bring to the genre that somebody else wasn't already doing better than me. I didn't think I had anything fresh to do in the genre. So he bugs me off and on for about a year about writing a military thriller. And finally, he says, I'll make you a deal. He comes to me and he says, I'll make you a deal. He says, if you write me 10 pages of a military thriller, as God is my witness, I will never ask you for page number 11. If you don't want to write page number 11 on your own, I'll never ask for it. So I sat down to bang out 10 quick pages. And frankly, I didn't want them to be very good. I really didn't, because I didn't want him bugging me to write the rest of the book. So in the Navy, we used to call that sandbagging. I don't know what the civilian equivalent that is, but my intent was to sandbag him, which was to give him 10 pages of not so good work, so that he would leave me alone and realize this was not the route that I needed to be taking. And 19 hours later, in a state of complete exhaustion, I went and crawled back into my bed and went to sleep. I worked almost completely around the clock, and I was completely in love with the story. What I had discovered is that I could write a military thriller about ordinary people, where there's no Tom Cruise character. I like to say that most military thrillers are populated by somebody I call the guy. He's usually got perfect teeth and washboard abs, biceps of steel. He fights like Jet Li. He shoots like a sniper. He can fly an F-18. He can defuse a bomb. He can ride a motorcycle, get the girl. It's like, I was in the Navy 23 years. I never met that guy. What I met were ordinary men and women who worked together to accomplish extraordinary things. And you, by the way, being one of them. And not so much with the woman thing. You were an ordinary man. But as far as I know.
I can't be an ordinary woman.
If you want to. I'm not, I'm certainly not going to go imposing genders on you here. But that was the thing that I discovered that I could do. And people responded to it. 99 times out of 100, if I get a piece of fan mail or an email or what have you about the books, it's people who are writing to tell me that what I had written reminded them of their shipmates. They never say it reminds me of me. Nobody ever says, oh, it's just like me. But I remember these people. These are the kind of people I served with. This is the kind of things we did. These are the kind of mistakes we made. These were the kind of this is the kind of foolishness we got up to. But I want the average person to pick up the book and see a mirror that reflects themselves and not see a picture of Tom Cruise or Angelina Jolie. And I don't have any trouble with Tom Cruise and Angelina Jolie. They both rock the house. That's not the point. The point is that there's already plenty of people out there writing military novels about the guy. I figured I could write about ordinary men and women. And we're 4 books into the series, and every book gets bigger than the one before it. So
yeah, it seems like you've carved out a little piece of the genre, which is fantastic. I know no one ever publishes a book hoping it'll fail. And it's interesting that you said you were trying to sandbag those first 10 pages. But knowing you the way I do, I think you're selling yourself short, because I don't think you could ever do that.
I don't think I could either, actually. I'm not very good at that. I always think I'm going to take the easy way. I always think, oh, yeah, I'm just going to, well, I mean, one of the things that happened in The Seventh Angel, and this is just about not being willing to take the easy way, but there was a scene in the book where I'm trying to establish the capabilities of this submersible robot, this underwater robot called Mouse, Multi-Purpose Autonomous Underwater System. And he's rescuing this submersible on the bottom of the ocean. And I wrote the chapter about 5 times, and I wanted it to be this pulse-pounding kind of adrenaline flooding thing, and it was never working. And the reason it never worked, I eventually realized, because I had never allowed you to bond with the people on the submersible. I'd always done it from outside the submarine that was in trouble, and it was like a video game. It was blips on a screen, and there wasn't any human investment. So I thought, I'm going to go back and write a chapter where we get to know the people in the submersible right before the accident that traps them on the bottom of the ocean. So now we have some emotional investment in them. Well, I realized the perfect character for this was a character I'd already created for the book named Charlie Swigert, who was supposed to be the technician who operates Mouse. So I stole my own character, pulled him forward in the novel like 3 chapters, and stuck him in the seat of the submersible, and suddenly the chapter came alive, and everything works, and everything's happy. And I thought, when I get to the part later where I need to have the submersible technician, I'll use the same character again, but I'll disguise him. I'll make him taller. I'll give him different hair. I'll give him a different name. What have you. But I discovered I couldn't do that. I couldn't shortchange the reader. It had to be a legitimate different person. I couldn't just copy my own work. So I decided, well, it's been a while since I've introduced an interesting female character. It'd been 2 or 3 chapters since I'd introduced a new female character. I thought the mouse technician is going to be named Anne Rourke. And as soon as I put her name down in my word processor, Anne Rourke hated the Navy. And I had no idea that was going to happen, but she popped whole cloth into my head, and she hated the Navy. So now I'm in the interesting place of writing a naval warfare thriller where one of the main characters in the story actually hates the Navy. And it took the story in places I would have never gone. But the thing is, it's one of those things where none of that would have happened if I was able to take the easy way out. If I was able to just copy my own character and change Charlie to George, and make him taller and skinny instead of short and fat. And, if I had been able to file the serial numbers off my own character and take the lazy way out, which is what I planned to do, we would have ended up with a completely different book. But as it is, my nature won't let me do that. I end up doing things the hard way.
So you discuss Anne O'Rourke and how she hates the Navy, and that just jumped into whole cloth. Do you find that your characters do that, or are a lot of them just sort of an extension of you? Are they people that you know? What sort of inspires you to create your characters?
Wow, this is another case where the process is different almost every time. Some characters just come into my head right off the bat. I know what, I shouldn't say I know what they're going to do. They know what they're going to do. And that's kind of crazy. It's funny. I'll be in here typing away, doing something, and I'll start laughing, and Brenda will stick her head in the door and say, "What's funny?" I'm like, "Dave Stalin just said the funniest thing," and she's like, "Well, that's you, isn't it?" "Well, yeah, but it was David talking." It's like, I don't know. I'm channeling. It's funny because characters will say things I'm not expecting, and they'll do things that I'm not expecting. And I know that's obviously me operating on some subconscious level, but I don't know how to tell you how that happens. Sometimes I do take characters who are intentionally modeled on real people. I've never intentionally modeled a character on myself, but I would like to point out, and as someone pointed out to me a long time ago, I wrote the first draft of Dome City Blues when I was on the Paul F. Foster, and seemed like we were having a lot of water shortages, and I was fascinated with taking showers. Every time I got an opportunity to take a shower, I took a shower. Well, sure enough, David Stalin is in the damn shower every time you turn around in that book. He seems to have a fixation on showers. And the other thing is, I was a big-time chain smoker in those days, and damned if David Stalin wasn't a chain smoker. So I think you could probably say if there are insecurities or frailties in a character, it's probably me. And if there are strengths and something heroic in a character, it's probably something I observed in somebody else. So I don't ever intentionally model my characters after myself, but I think my weaknesses and my foibles creep into them.
Okay. So even your minor characters, or your minor characters just people that they exist and they're just kind of whole cloth?
Well, I don't think there's any such thing as a minor character. There obviously are from a storytelling perspective, but when you start thinking of them as real people, which they become to you when you're writing, everybody is the center of their own universe. Everybody is, the universe surrounds them. If they're not in a room, they don't see what's happening. So it's like for them, they may not be the protagonist. They may not be in the room or on the spot when the big thing happens. They may not be the architect of whatever the grand designs are, but each one of them is the hero of his or her own story. So to some degree, even if they're only on the page for half a page, they have to be as real to me as, I may not have put as much time into them, but they're as real to me as, somebody who dominates half the novel.
That reminded me of a story, and I'm pretty sure you were there for that because it happened when we were both on the Paul Foster together. We were doing an ASW exercise and we were going active, and one of our shipmates was down in the transmitter room for this active sonar, and every time we went active, we would pop about 40 fuses. And in between cycles, he was swapping out fuses so that we could go active again and continue to prosecute the contact.
Yep.
So when you say everyone is the hero in their own story, you could write a whole book about ASW and the scenario that we did. And tracking the contact and all the little details that are involved in that. But if you don't include that half a page or
Yeah.
2 pages or whatever of Brad Cantwell down in the space
Yes.
swapping out fuses, it's not a real story. It's
Yeah.
just like, yes, that's some stuff that happened.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the thing that makes it magical to me. That's the thing that makes it interesting to me. It's if you pick up most military thrillers or you watch most movies, they're going to give you the impression that there's one guy who kind of does everything. In real life, it's for a moment in time, the most important person on the ship is the 19-year-old kid standing starboard side lookout who sees smoke on the horizon from this cruise missile that's cooking in below radar. It's like, and then 90 seconds later, the most important person on the ship for this 2 minutes in time is the 23-year-old petty officer from Podunk, Missouri, who's operating the radar. It's like all of these people together. It's like you can't have an orchestra with just the conductor. And most military fiction wants you to believe there's one guy waving the baton and everything magically happens, but there aren't. There's, it takes everybody. It takes the whole orchestra to play a symphony.
And I think that, again, that's one of the aspects of your books that I really do believe you have carved out very well.
That's my niche.
Is ensuring is ensuring that everybody plays their part, and it's not just, like you said, James Bond rolling in to save the day, or super multi-purpose lieutenant, officer, department head who would never be in the position to do the things he or she is doing, but yet there they are standing over going, hey, you need to turn that screw this way, or whatever. So that's one of the things I really care for about your books.
Oh, thank you.
So we're kind of running into about an hour here. So I wanted to ask you a couple more questions that didn't have anything to do with your books.
Okay.
And because, again, the podcast is We'll Review It Our Shelves, we've discussed some of the books that you have on your shelves or on your shelf. What sort of movies would I find on Jeff Edwards' shelf?
Well, if you wait a little bit longer, a few more weeks, you'll probably find out in onesies and twosies. So slowly but surely, I've been recommending every movie that I own for your for the podcast, for the listener's choice parts. I don't know. There's sci-fi. There's detective movies. I've got The Hunt for Red October. I've got the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've got all the Back to the Future movies. I've got this fantastic, brilliant British television detective series called A Touch of Frost. If you've never watched that, watch it. Read the books for that matter. They're amazing. I've got a little bit of everything. It's like my tastes are very eclectic. I don't really have horror, although I do have some movies with elements of horror. Like, you could argue that the slasher parts from Silence of the Lambs would qualify. But I don't have anything that I've intentionally selected from the horror genre. But it's a little bit of everything, Shawshank Redemption, I don't know, Blade Runner 2049, Blade Runner.
Fantastic.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a fantastic movie. That's going to be like Blade Runner. That's going to be one of those where for the next 30 years, people are going to be talking about how they have no idea why that movie didn't blow up the box office.
Yeah, still trying to parse out the meaning of the movie. And
Speaking of movies that didn't blow up the box office, The Right Stuff. Oh, my God, I love that movie. And that's another movie that became a huge classic and is looked on very, very fondly. And it's, but, for that matter, The Shawshank Redemption didn't blow up the box office. It's, we look back and go, it's a masterpiece. How could we not have spotted this movie? Then again, The Princess Bride didn't blow up the box office. And that's another one I've got. But I've got a little bit of everything. My tastes are incredibly eclectic. All the Star Wars movies, even the ones I'm not crazy about. All the Star Trek movies.
Even the ones you're not crazy about?
Even the ones I'm not crazy about. As far as I'm concerned, with the original series, Star Trek, have you ever noticed that the even numbers are pretty good and the odd ones not so much?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The Wrath of Khan was great. The third one, Search for Spock, first one, Star Trek, The Motionless Picture, it was visually stunning and not a whole lot happened. They had 30 minutes worth of movies stretched into, 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever it was.
Well, I read some of the histories about that, and that was originally... The script was originally written to be the pilot for a second Star Trek series.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that was one of those cases, and I think it's interesting. They had just really discovered new ways of doing amazing visual effects. And I think they got so enamored with the toy, they forgot that it exists in the pursuit of storytelling. They forgot to tell a compelling story. Speaking of which, that whole story was basically stolen from an original series episode anyway. It's the Changeling. I mean, if you changed V'ger to Nomad, you got the Changeling, and we've already done this story.
Yes. I mean, I still like Star Trek: The Motionless Picture, as you called it.
So do I.
But yeah, the even numbered ones tended to be better for the original series related movies.
I don't know. I've got a little bit of everything. It's what I don't have that I've got to get is Ocean's 8. I really enjoyed that in the theater. I don't know if you saw it. I don't know if you liked it. I really enjoyed it.
I didn't see it, and I've known a few people that said that they enjoyed it, but they weren't particularly thrilled by it as much as they liked the Ocean's 11, the first one, which again is a remake, which had been made about 30 years prior to that, which works really well with my 30-year theory.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway.
I think your 30-year theory is spot on. I also, speaking of remakes, have a lot of cases where I'll have the original of something and then the remake of it. I have the 1929 Robert Dunant version of The Count of Monte Cristo, and then I have the, 2000 remake that had Guy Pearce and Jim, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Caviezel, I don't know, which I also thought was brilliant. I have multiple versions of quite a few movies where someone will make something in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s and they'll remake it in the 90s or 2015 or something, and I'll enjoy both of them. I've got both versions of The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I like them for completely different reasons.
And I have very similar feelings for some of the remakes that I've watched, and some of them will be panned by people. Why do they have to remake it? Or some people don't realize that it is a remake. I liked War of the Worlds. I love the original 50s version, and I like the Tom Cruise version. Again, for totally different reasons, because it's a different exploration of the theme of the movie, but I still like them both. I think anyone is perfectly entitled to enjoy movies on their own merits, remake or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what kind of books would we see on your shelf?
A little bit of everything again. A lot of sci-fi, a lot of nonfiction. Probably 50% of my collection is nonfiction research books. I'm just looking to my right. I have bookshelves all over my office. The ones immediately close to my head, I'm just going to name some random titles here. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Sabotage by Matt Cook. Night Probe by Clive Cussler. The Sky's the Limit by The Sky's Not the Limit by Neil deGrasse Tyson. The Collaborator by Ian Kartanoff. Just all kinds of stuff. Tom Clancy, The Hunt for Red October is right there. Harry Harrison's Captive Universe. Steve Perry's The 97th Step. Then there's the Watch Officer's Guide and the Blue Jackets Manual.
Is that the original issue?
That is not the original issue. This is actually the latest versions of both, because I want to make sure that when I'm writing about sailors that I'm using the correct and current terminology. Because let's face it, we were in a long time ago now. That's quite a ways ago. Well, not as far back for you as it was for me. Yeah,
I was thinking about that the other day. It was 30 years ago this year that I joined the Navy. So that's 3 full-on decades. There's a lot can change in that time.
Yeah, a bit. Let me see on the other side. The MLA Style Manual, the Practical Homicide Investigation, the Oxford Classical Dictionary, not the full thing, of course. This one's only about 5 inches thick, so it's the abridged Oxford Classical Dictionary.
Oh, no one likes the abridged version.
Yeah, I know. Ready Player One by Ernie Klein, Gods and Heroes, which I don't remember who wrote that, but it's an interesting book about mythology. A little bit of everything. Oh, The Idiot's Guide to Submarines. If you ever wanted to know who's got a copy of that, I've got a copy of that. The Sea and Soviet Strategy. A little bit of everything. Oh, The Making of Star Trek. There you go.
Outstanding. Going back just a few books, Ready Player One, I have yet to read that, and I did want to say that thank you for recommending that as a movie. I absolutely enjoyed watching it. I still need to watch it again to continue to process. I think that's kind of a Blade Runner-esque sort of movie where it's going to be watched over and over again, and every time I'm going to catch something just a little bit different. And I don't just mean pop culture references or movie references or whatnot, just little bits and pieces about the Oasis and dealing with the psychology of being outside of yourself and being whatever it is you want to be in a different place instead
Yeah.
of being who you want to be in the real world. So I love that exploration. So thank you again for suggesting that. And I still need to read the book.
I was really worried that they were going to ruin that. Well, they can't ruin the book. I was really worried that they were going to miss a chance to bring a really entertaining story to the screen. I was really worried. And the thing is, I feel like they had a really good sense of when to deviate. I know people who have looked at the movie, who've read the book and looked at the movie and said, well, this part's completely different. I'm like, well, yeah, it has to be. It has to be. One of the really exciting scenes that takes place in the book is the character Parzival playing the perfect game of Pac-Man over a period of 6 hours, and all the stuff that happens while it's, and while it's compelling in the book, that would be death on screen. 30 seconds of watching somebody play Pac-Man is too much. It's the difference between the media. Funny that I actually brought that up because I'm working on a screenplay based on one of my own book projects right now. And I'm telling the same story in two completely different formats. And I'm realizing there are things I can get away with in the book that absolutely will not work on the screen, and vice versa.
Which kind of as sort of wrapping up the thing. So what can you tell us about what you're working on? You've obviously spoken about Night City Blues and the screenplay. Is that something that we might see soon, or is that something you can talk about?
I probably better not talk about it.
Okay.
I've also, you could get clues if you watch my social media and notice the book that I was mentioning several times that I was working on that I'm no longer talking about. It's not so much because I've been sworn to secrecy, and it's more along the lines of the producer that I'm working with thinks that it has tremendous commercial potential, far more so than anything else I've ever written. And he thinks it could be the kind of thing that sets Hollywood on its ear. And he doesn't want to give anybody any hints that it's coming. So he doesn't want them to be able to look it up and go, oh, it's that thing. He wants them to basically hit him like a bolt out of the blue. So I have agreed to be kind of quiet about it for the moment. So I'm talking about the fact that it exists, but I'm not talking about what it is, and I apologize for that. I don't mean to be deliberately mysterious.
I find it interestingly mysterious, intriguing, in fact. So we'll keep an eye out for that.
I will just say this, and I've always said that I tend to write idea stories.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that it is, in my opinion, by far the coolest idea I've ever had for a story.
Well, I've liked your ideas so far, so...
Thank you. The funny thing is, I at this stage of the game, I will give away a little bit. I'm working with astronauts and scientists, and every time I show it to one of them to get their opinion and to get feedback, they say the same thing, which is, "Oh my God, we can't believe nobody's ever done this." So we'll see. Fingers crossed.
I knocked on wood.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I'm here for you, my friend.
I appreciate it.
So, just closing out, what are some ways that our listeners can reach out to you if they wanted to email you, if they want to see your social media?
Probably the quickest way would be to just go to my website, which is jeffedwardswrites.com. If you Google Jeff Edwards, my old website will probably be the first thing that pops up, which is navythriller.com. By the way, I don't know. It's been a while since I Googled myself, but it was very cool that when you Googled my name, I was the first thing that popped up for, on the list of all the Jeff Edwardses in the world. That's a little bit of an ego infusion. Also, the day I found out I had a Wikipedia page was pretty entertaining. But, jeffedwardswrites.com. If you just Google Jeff Edwards, probably navythriller.com will pop up. If you click on that link, it'll take you to the new website. And that links to social media, and it's got a contact me form and stuff like that. So,
okay.
So all the spammers already know how to find me. So might as well let some non-spammers figure out how to discover me as well.
God bless the technology.
Yes,
one day
indeed.
We'll figure that out.
Well, I am confused by my spam. I'll tell you that right now. If just looking at my spam, if I need to lose weight and I need Rogaine, for my receding hairline, and I need financial counseling, and certain parts of my anatomy need to be enlarged. Why do all these Russian women want to marry me? I can't figure that out.
Maybe they think you have enough money to buy all of those things, and that makes it a worthwhile investment.
That could be. I'm just guessing that that's just the nature of spam, but I am kind of curious about that.
Well, I know that Prince from Nairobi eventually did pass away, and
Oh, he did?
they just found a vault full of money that no one had ever
Oh,
claimed.
nobody wanted it.
And he tried.
He tried so hard. Oh my God. Oh, I'm going to be laughing about that for 3 days. Poor Nigerian prince trying to give away all that money and nobody wanted it. Oh my goodness.
So that spam might actually be worth money one day.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that will be worth money one day, again, for our listeners, Jeff and I have known each other for quite some time, and we were stationed on the ship together. Jeff is actually the first signature I ever got on that ship when I checked on board, because you were the officer of the deck, and you signed my orders the day I checked on board. So
one of the best days of my life turned out to be a lifelong friendship.
I was just going to say, and it has been a tremendous journey for the last 25 years. So yeah, and here's to 25 more.
Indeed.
So I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to do this interview. I know it seemed like it was a bit of an awkward request on my end, because I kind of felt like I was taking advantage of a friendship, if I'm being honest. But I've always wanted to interview someone, and for a first interview, you can't go wrong talking to someone you actually know. And thanks for making it easy for me. And here's hoping that this leads to more interviews on We'll Review It Our Shelves. And again, thanks for your time.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And I'll just say you're absolutely not taking advantage of me. If anything, I'm taking advantage of you getting on this fantastic podcast, because I love it. Like I say, there's only 3. I'm only permanently subscribed to 3 podcasts, and yours is the one I do the happy dance when a new episode drops. So
I love the happy dance.
Well, and I'm really good at it. You know this from having seen me do it. So I do the happy dance.
I have.
Far better than most heavy-set Caucasian American males of my age group.
That's great. How do I get myself out of this one? Okay,
just edit this part out.
Yeah. So, listeners, we will see you. It's funny. I was reading a podcasting thing that said, how many people say we'll see you? Like, I don't actually see my listeners. I don't know. It's just a turn of phrase. But
yep.
We'll see you with our regularly scheduled episode, whichever one this falls between. And we hope you enjoyed the non-numbered super special interview episode.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it too. And thank you very much for inviting me.